So welcome to DAcres, and this is actually a great place to start the tour of DAcres because this has a lot of the foundational elements to it. This place is where my aunt and uncle moved up to in the 1940s to get back to the land. They were living in Hartford, Connecticut. You can get comfortable. We'll probably be here for at least 5 minutes. It's really nice here right now.
It's super nice here.
So they decided to go back to the land. They were living in Hartford, Connecticut. There was pollution. There was crime. Just crowded. Anyway, it's like a city today. The same sort of sucky. You don't have access to your food. You don't have self-control. So they decided to move to Dorchester. They bought 200 acres. They paid $900 for it. It was a good deal of money though in that day. I mean, my uncle was making good money in Hartford, and it was like $200 a month. So that sort of gives you the scale of things in the 1940s. And he knew something about living on the land because he'd grown up in the northern kingdom of Vermont. So he was pretty versed in this sort of thing, living in the woods. But my aunt had come from New Bedford and made her way to Hartford, so she'd been a city girl. And when she moved here, there was only 90 people in town, and there was no electricity and no running water. And mud season was a lot worse than it is right now. You know what I mean? It was hard to get in and out of here. So she was lonely, and she said she cried for like 2 years through this whole business. Like, it was rough. But I moved up here in 1997, and at that point she was 89 years old, and she had no regrets. She was really happy and proud of making it up here. She moved up in her late 30s, and she made something of it. She raised a family and lived her life, and she was quite content. So it was a sacrifice and an adaptation, but one that had long-term rewards for her. And this house, when they moved here, this house was decrepit. I mean, they paid $900 for the place, and it just was barely standing, yeah? The house. And the barn was what was around here. And that was from the prior tenants. The prior tenants had moved up here in like the 1800s, early 1800s. Yeah, the house was built in like 1830s. I found some newspaper in the wall, like 1835. And that was all the insulation that was in there too, just so you know. But the idea was when the settlers came up to Dorchester in like the late 1700s, early 1800s, there was nobody up here. Yeah, it was just forest. And so this is the story of our history in America. We just come in there and cut all the trees down, and then try to sort of put a traditional way of raising food, sheep farming, onto this landscape. Like all these people that come from England and Ireland and all that, and we're like, we'll just raise sheep like we do at home. And they tried to do that. They tried to clear all this forest and raise sheep. And it didn't really work for several reasons, The town of Dorchester grew up to like 1,200 people in 1850, and then the Civil War happened, the Industrial Revolution was happening, there was Western expansion, there was free land in Ohio, so basically everybody left town. All the young people went to war. The town was in debt for the war till like 1920s, because the town had to pay for the troops. It's a different kind of war. It sort of makes sense in some way. But the idea was that the town went bankrupt. And so, like I said, from 1,200 people to when my aunt got here in 1940, there was 90 people. So that's a tremendous collapse. So when you think about, you're riding around New Hampshire, you see all these stone walls, you see all these abandoned cellar holes, you see all these old churches that are barely, all these. It's because there was a huge boom up here, and then a collapse, right? And when you go from 1,200 people to 90 people in the space of like 100 years, it's because they were not, they weren't farming for this climate. They weren't farming for the long term. They didn't have a diversified farming system. And, other factors such as war, you lose all your young people, really it collapsed. The economy collapsed. And when you think about New Hampshire today, there is the demographics where we can't retain young people. We're spending all our money on war. We don't really have a diversified economy. We depend a lot on tourism. And so we're like really susceptible to some sort of collapse as well. We don't really have a lot of backbone up here. So what we're trying to do is sort this out. by localizing our economy and getting more on a subsistence basis and really getting in touch with the utilization of our natural resources for the long term. So instead of coming in and cutting all our trees down in the next 10, 20 years and what are we going to do now? We're going to try to nurture the existing ecology and work with the existing ecology and work with the resources so we have something to work with here in 100 years and 200 years and centuries from now. I mean, we want to be farming for thousands of years, for generations. So that's how we need to get on the approach.